Me and the youths united against corruption, changing the world and the way we function. The youths united against corruption, changing the world and the way we function. You remember the youth, them are with future leaders, policy creators, decision makers. As if them are not just the cornerstone, but a crucial part to a better tomorrow. United against corruption, changing the world and the way we function. The youths united against corruption.
A message from the Integrity Commission.
Hey, I'm Abijah, the Roots Man. Today, I want to talk to you about something powerful. Peace. Peace isn't just the absence of conflict. It's about kindness, understanding, and respect. It starts with us. Every choice we make can build bridges or burn them. Let's choose peace in our words, our action, and our hearts. Peace begins with you. Together, we can create a brighter and safer future for everyone. Join me. Let's be that change we want to see.
Jamaica is on the move with smarter and cleaner transportation. The government is enhancing the JUTC fleet with 100 new CNG buses with 10 specially outfitted for the disabled. Running on compressed natural gas, these buses reduce emissions while offering advanced safety features and Wi-Fi. Jamaica is driving in comfort towards a sustainable future.
Experience the natural mystic of Bob Marley at the annual Bob Marley Tribute Concert, Emancipation Park, Friday, February 6th, Bob Marley Day. See musical tributes by Stephen Marley, Ed Turner, Bushman, Warrior King, the NAJ Musical Trio, plus two reggae bands from Mexico. And PBCJ will be there to bring you the live broadcast starting at 7 p.m. That's the Bob Marley Tribute Concert, Friday, February 6th. A truly international natural mystic in music in Emancipation Park. Admission free!
Send there's something and come back. Back to sender! God, I thank you so much.
Miracles await and miracles abound. Tune in every Sunday at 7 a.m. for your share of the Miracle Revival Hour with Reverend Dr. Blair. Come for the word, stay for the worship. Right here on PBCJ.
Miracle worker, work one for me.
Show them the truth and that you not like. You not love you never put up a fight, no.
I'm so easy, cool and me calm. Love you, girl. Let me give you all. When me looking at your eyes, me see the possibilities. And me not gonna tell you lies and give you broken promises.
You not love the youth, you shoot them pan side. No respect for the roots, you shoot them aside. Cause a long time we are Rocky Tina down. Me say a long time we are Skanky Tina down. Inna me blood, Marcus Garvey. Inna me blood, inna me blood, inna me blood. Bob Marley, inna me blood.
Struggle like a real soldier. Just like the Queens of Ethiopia. Right there in Kingston, Jamaica. From King Street to Princess Street.
The following is brought to you by MOCA, the major organized crime and anti-corruption agency with kind support of NIA and USAID.
Criminal minds think they are cunning. The major organized crime and anti-corruption agency have them running. Your friend a shout, come scam. Take time running, because we ready for the ops. Drive up on your block, step out now me block. Cyber take a boy your laptop. Pull up every lock, no evidence to drop. We put it in a cuffs and now we have the underground. Sin you say scam, you better look out fit. When you move corrupt, better look out fit. They say you get wet, look out fit. Look out fit, look out fit. From you say scam, you better look out fit. When you move corrupt, better look out fit. They say you get wet, look out fit. Look out fit, look out fit.
The proceeding was brought to you by MOCA, the major organized crime and anti-corruption agency, with the kind support of NIA and USAID.
Peace begins with us. Every act of kindness, every step towards understanding brings us closer to a brighter tomorrow. Let's choose unity, compassion, and hope. Together, we can build a future where peace reigns.
Brighter tomorrow starting today.
Welcome to PBCJ's coverage of the sitting of the Senate. I'm Simone Absalom Gale, and I'll provide a brief outline of what's expected to take place during the sitting. But before we begin, did you know that the budget is opened by the Minister of Finance, who outlines how the various programs and policies of the government will be financed and how the money will be raised? Other speakers by convention include the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, the Opposition Spokesman on Finance, and ministers selected by the government, as well as those in the opposition selected by the Leader of the Opposition. The budget debate is closed by the Minister of Finance after all presentations are made. Remember, the budget debate is usually followed by the sectoral debate. In this sitting's agenda, the Financial Administration and Audit Amendment Act 2026 is to be taken. The Financial Investigations Division Amendment Act 2026 is to be taken. For your information, the amendment makes provisions regarding the circumstances in which the Financial Investigations Division may give information or receive information. This information relates to other public bodies in Jamaica or a foreign financial intelligence department or association of such departments. The bill, Financial Investigations Division Amendment Act, was passed in the House of Representatives on January 20. And that's what's on the agenda. It should be noted that elements of the day's agenda can be changed or moved. But before we go, here are a few things you should bear in mind if you plan to attend a session at Gordon House. No visitor shall create any act of disorder within the precincts of the House. No visitor shall be admitted to the House without first obtaining an admission card. Visitors who remain within the precincts of the House during a suspension of the session are asked to keep silent. No photography, videography, or sketching of the proceedings is allowed unless so authorized by the presiding officer. And there should be no smoking inside the parliamentary building. Before we go, here are a few more interesting things about Jamaica's constitution. It's divided into chapters. Chapter 1 explains the meaning of terms and ideas expressed in the Constitution and make clear that the Constitution is the supreme law of Jamaica and that all other laws are secondary to it and depend upon it. In fact, it says, quote, "If any other law is inconsistent with this Constitution shall prevail, and the other law shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void." End quote. Under Chapter 5 of the Constitution, Parliament is given power to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of Jamaica. Chapter 6 speaks to the executive powers. These include that of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and the House of Representatives. Chapter 7 explains of the judicature. This is a network of courts ranging from petty sessions of the Court of Appeal and even beyond to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in London, which is the highest court. That will change in the near future when Jamaica becomes a republic. Now over to the proceedings.
Dengue is ordinarily a mild disease. Persons may get a fever, headache, joint and muscle pains. The illness is often resolved through rest and adequate hydration along with paracetamol to treat the accompanying fever. However, on occasions the illness can progress to severe dengue, which can result in organ failure, bleeding and severe fluid depletion that can lead to shock and even death. Therefore, it is important for persons who are experiencing fever, vomiting, severe abdominal pain, bleeding under the skin, feeling very weak, or getting confused to seek immediate attention. Let us work together to protect ourselves against dengue.
Today, we can report 2 consecutive years of reduction in major crimes and murders, with a significant reduction of almost 20% in murders for 2024.
Between January 2022 and January 2025, we have reduced murders by 51%. And January 2025 had the lowest monthly murder count since September 2014.
Our efforts have also resulted in the reduction of active gangs by 50%. We continue to increase firearm seizures, and in more communities, we are experiencing less violence. We will realize our vision of Jamaica as the place of choice to live, work, do business, raise families, and retire in peace and prosperity.
The proceeding was brought to you by the Office of the Prime Minister.
Hi everyone, here are 5 benefits of being a beneficiary of the Students' Loan Bureau. 1. Benefit from our 99% approval rate. 2. Benefit from our low interest rate, so less burden when you need to repay. 3. Benefit from the fact that we require no collateral when applying. 4. We're giving you more time to focus on your studies while we focus on the financing. No need to worry about repaying while in school. Number 5. Receive a 14 months grace period after your graduation date before you enter repayment. Don't forget to follow us on all SLB platforms for more SLB info.
I wonder who that somebody be. No, sir. Let me look for my glasses. Oh, how does somebody look like rise up? It's Lottie, walk on. Me glad for see you, right? And though things never go on for you, America, me glad say you there.
Yeah.
Lift your head high.
Yeah.
Stay out of trouble.
Yeah.
And you can have a fresh start back home.
All right, Mr. D. Thanks, you hear?
Let's all work together for a fresh start back home.
The following is brought to you by the Office of the Prime Minister.
A new story is being written for all Jamaicans. The Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation is on a mission to transform lives. From increasing access to potable water, to providing secure homes for the most vulnerable, and helping you own a piece of the rock. We're revitalizing communities and preserving our environment. We're making an impact. See the difference. Feel the difference. Building a better Jamaica for you and me.
You can feel it. Make JC.
Tell me something. How much time you ever hear the government announce a project and wonder why they must spend millions on this and not on that? Well, if you think there's nothing you can do about how your money is spent, think again. Jamaica's budget is more than just numbers. It reveals our biggest problems and goals, our plans to fix them, and what to prioritize. We can even call it a promise book of what will be done to improve our lives. Now, let's talk about the 4 stages of the budget cycle so we can understand how it works and get involved. Stage 1. Planning and review. The Ministry of Finance sends out a budget call to every ministry, which outlines the priorities and constraints to guide how those ministries prepare their budget. After ministries submit their drafts, the Finance Ministry reviews, compiles, and sends them to Cabinet for review and approval. Stage 2. Parliamentary debate and approval. The Finance Minister tables all budget documents in the House of Representatives. The Standing Finance Committee, which is all 63 MPs, sits to examine the budget documents, and each minister presents their budget and answers concerns the committee has. The committee's report is then tabled in the House, followed by the estimated expenditure, which is tabled as legislation called the Appropriations Bill. That's right, the budget of Jamaica is law. The budget debate formally opens. We have presentations from the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister, Opposition Leader, and the Shadow Finance Minister. After their presentations, our MPs vote for or against approval. Like all legislation, it goes to the Senate for their approval and then to the Governor General for his royal assent. No later than March 31st, end of the financial year. Stage 3. Implementation. The new financial year begins and approved budgets are sent to ministries. Collecting taxes, borrowing loans, and receiving grants begin. And so does the spending. Stage 4. Budget oversight. Now, this is where citizens don't need permission to get involved. Throughout the year, operations and spending are assessed by internal auditors and the Auditor General's department that makes sure public entities are compliant with laws and that their financial reports are accurate. All Auditor General reports are submitted to our Parliament's Public Accounts Committee for review and cross-examination of public officials. The Ministry of Finance, Integrity Commission, and MOCA also monitor government spending to guard against poor financial management and corruption. It is our job to review these reports, check the findings in the newspaper, and look up if breaches are fixed at jampja.org. If not, ask your MP what he or she has done to ensure public officials are held to account. No more 9-day wonders. So, did the government follow through on their spending and investment promises last year? What promises will next year's budget have? How will they affect you, and how can you ensure that you get what is promised? For access to the national budget, check out JAMP's easy digital version and contact info for your MP at jampja.org. Then link your MP and see what progress is being made throughout the entire budget cycle. Support JAMP. Let's do our job to make Jamaica land we love, Jamaica land we own, and Jamaica land we run well. A message from the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, funded by the European Union in partnership with the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica.
No more guarantors for student loan. Your government cares about your education, and we don't want you to ever have to worry about going to university. The Students' Loan Bureau has a loan for you so you can focus on your future. Jamaica improve, heart free, wages increase, housing schema bill up, we have more opportunities, roads bill, and the dollar stable. We are building Jamaica.
In Jamaica, there needs to be one law for all. Every member of this society, regardless of profession, finances, or the area you live in.
I have some bad news.
The company didn't get the contract?
The money they paid us for it has gotten out.
Are you serious?
I'm afraid so, and I understand that there are going to be corruption charges.
Minister, please come with us, sir.
Breaking news. A senior politician and senior civil servant have been charged for corruption.
Thank God not all of them stay, sir.
Build integrity. One law for all.
A message from NIA.
Hey, I'm Abijah, the Roots Man. Today, I want to talk to you about something powerful. Peace. Peace isn't just the absence of conflict. It's about kindness, understanding, and respect. It starts with us. Every choice we make can build bridges or burn them. Let's choose peace in our words, our action, and our hearts. Peace begins with you. Together, we can create a brighter and safer future for everyone. Join me. Let's be that change we want to see.
More of your money is now tax-free? Know that the income tax threshold has been increased. Your government is looking after you responsibly, so our economy can do even more for you.
The proceeding was brought to you by the Office of the Prime Minister.
What is the role of a backbencher in government? I'm glad you asked. They're members of parliament who are not appointed to cabinet. So they sit in the back of the legislature and they apply pressure. They examine what government legislates.
Jesus, O Lord. Amen.
Be seated, please. This Honorable Senate, for Friday, the 6th day of February, 2026, is called to order. Before we begin the business of the day, some housekeeping matters. Senator Lambert Brown is seeking permission to join us online. Senator Brown, are those in favor? Thank you. Welcome, Senator Brown. Turn on, we're not hearing you, Senator Brown. Anyway, so Senator Brown is joining us online. We have it's my pleasure this morning to welcome 20 kids from the Tomlinson Christian Academy and Children's Center in Ocherius. And they are under the supervision of teacher Miss Lawrence. Would you please stand, Miss Lawrence? So I had the pleasure of interacting with them, and I can report to you that a brighter set of kids I haven't seen. So welcome. You're always welcome to the Senate. And anytime you want to buzz a day off of school, you encourage Miss Lawrence to bring you back down here. So welcome. I had the pleasure of meeting the head girl. Head girl, stand, and head boy. Yeah, welcome. Really lovely meeting you, and the only thing I would ask Miss Lawrence is just to ensure that when you're going over you keep the driver under close supervision to ensure that the kids get home safely. So thank you very much for coming. And we have two other members of the public from the Body of Christ Deliverance Center who are paying a visit with us today. So welcome to you as well. I'm to apologize to members of the Senate and all the legion of persons who view our sittings on a weekly basis for the absence of our sign language interpreter, who has a personal difficulty today and is unavailable. Now, in the normal course of things, the Parliament would have made efforts to seek a replacement to ensure that those members of the public who access our deliberations through the sign language interpreter, we would have ensured that they would have been serviced by an alternate interpreter, but the notice was extremely short, and in fact, I'm assured that every effort was made and that the replacement individual who we would normally have used was not available to us this morning. So we apologize to the members of the public and specifically the persons who access our deliberations through the service of the sign language interpreter. And we trust that the circumstances that have kept our usual signer away would in due course alter so that she can return to us on the next occasion. Thank you very much. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate are the following: Annual report and audited financial statements of the Financial Institution Services Limited for the year 2023 and its related ministry paper numbered 05 of 2026, titled Annual Report and Audited Financial Statements of Financial Institution Services Limited for the year ended March 31, 2023. Annual Report and Audited Financial Statements of the Financial Sector Adjustment Company Limited, FINSA, for the year March 2023 and its related ministry paper numbered 06 of 2026, titled Annual Report and Audited Financial Statements of Financial Sector Adjustment Company Limited for the year ended March 31, 2023. Annual Report of the Office of the Public Defender for the year 2024. Auditor General's Department Information Technology Audit Report on the Support Jamaica website for the Hurricane Melissa Relief Initiative. Auditor General's Department Compliance Audit Report on governance, procurement activities, and receipt and distribution of Starlink devices for the Hurricane Melissa Relief Initiative. Ministry paper numbered 07 of 2026, titled The Caribbean Development Bank Special Development Fund Unified 11th Cycle for the year ended March 2023. Ministry paper numbered 08 of 2026, titled Inter-American Investment Corporation IDB Invest Third General Capital Increase. Ministry paper numbered 09, 2026, titled Concept Paper, The Development of a National Policy for Alternative Dispute Resolution, ADR, entitled Advancing Justice Through Alternative Dispute Resolution for Jamaica. Ministry paper numbered 10 of 2026, titled Guidelines Governing the Involvement of Third Parties in the Implementation of Road Infrastructure Projects. The Casino Gaming General Regulations 2025 under the Casino Gaming Act. Integrity Commission's reports of investigation into allegations that the following officers of the Post and Telecommunications Department failed to submit their statutory declarations for the period ending December 31, 2023. Ms. Marvette McPherson, an inspector, Mr. Balford Bryan, also an inspector, Ms. Victoria Stewart, and Ms. Valerie Mullings, both branch managers, Ms. Cavell Miller, another branch manager, and Mrs. Hazel McClymont Donaldson, an inspector, and their indicative ruling. Integrity Commission's reports of investigation into allegations that the following officers of the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission failed to submit their statutory declarations for the period ending December 31, 2023. Mr. Philip Anderson and Ms. Nikisha Scott, investigators, and Mr. Daniel Jump, an accounting clerk or cashier, and their indicative ruling. Jamaica Public Bodies Third Supplementary Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 2026. fourth supplementary estimates 2025-2026. The Auditor General's Department certified appropriation accounts under Head 26,000 Recurrent, Ministry of National Security for the year 2019-2020. Head 26,000C Capital, Ministry of National Security, 2019-2020. Head 26,000C Capital, again for the Ministry of National Security for the year 2020-2021. Head 26,000 Recurrent for the Ministry of National Security for the year 2020-2021. Head 06,000 Office of the Services Commissions for the year 2021-2022. Head 17,000 Ministry of Tourism for the year 2022-2023. Head 28,000 Recurrent Ministry of Justice for the year 2022-2023. Head 28,000 Capital for the Ministry of Justice for the year 2022-2023. Head 42035 Department of Government Chemists for the year 2023-2024. Head 28,000C Capital Minister of Justice for the year 2023-2024. Head 28,000 Recurrent Minister of Justice for the year 2023-2024. And finally, by way of information, report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on its deliberations on the fourth supplementary estimates 2025-2026 and the Jamaica Public Body's third supplementary estimates of revenue and expenditure, and the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, on the fourth supplementary estimates for the financial year 2025-2026 and the Jamaica Public Body's third supplementary estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2026. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. To the Honorable Senate, I have the honor to advise the Honorable Senate that on the 3rd day of February 2026, the following bills were passed in the House of Representatives. 1. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Jury Act was passed with 8 amendments. And 2. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Cybercrimes Act and to provide for connected matters was passed without amendment. The Most Honorable Juliet Holness, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Minister.
Mr. President, I signify my willingness to take charge of the bills.
A bill shortly entitled the Jury Amendment Act 2026 read a first time, and a bill shortly entitled the Cybercrimes Amendment Act 2026 read a first time.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bills.
Thank you very much, Minister. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally. One minute, Senator Morris. No, go ahead, Minister.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved with reference to the resolution approved by this Honorable Senate on December 19, 2025, appointing a Standing Orders Committee of the Senate, that the name Abka Fitz-Henley be removed from the membership of the Standing Orders Committee, and that the name Shireen Golding Campbell be substituted therefore. And I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will ask for suspension of the standing orders to allow me to take this motion. Mr. President, I also beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motion. And whereas subsection 1G of section 41 of the Constitution of Jamaica requires a member of the Senate to vacate his seat if any firm in which he's a partner or any company of which he's a director or manager becomes a party to any contract with the government of Jamaica for or on behalf of the public service, or if he becomes a partner in a firm or a director or manager of a company which is a party to any such contract. And whereas Senator Ramon Small Ferguson, the Chief Executive Officer of Barita Investments Limited, and Managing Director of Barita Unit Trust Management Company Limited, both of which provide investment management and related financial services, and which may from time to time enter into contracts with the Government of Jamaica and its affiliated agencies. Be it resolved that this Honorable Senate, pursuant to subsection 1G1 of Section 41 of the Constitution of Jamaica, and in recognition of him having disclosed his interest, exempt the said senator from vacating his seat for reasons as aforesaid. Mr. President, I also beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you very much, Minister. Senator Professor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next sitting of the Senate, I will move the following motion. Whereas in 1975, through an amendment to the National Insurance Act, the National Housing Trust, NHT, was established, and whereas the amendment to the NIS legislation allowed for statutory deductions to be made from the salaries of all workers and required that these funds should be used exclusively for the building of houses for contributors. And whereas by 1978, the National Housing Trust Act was approved in the Houses of Parliament, thus giving the NHT its own legislative anchor. And whereas critical to this legislation was the creation of a fund that would contribute to the building of affordable houses to contributors. And whereas the NHT was established by the government of the day within the context of a foundational principle of social justice and a recognition that shelter is a right for our citizens. And whereas the NHT has led the transformation and modernization of Jamaica's housing stock, as seen in the over 300,000 houses that have been built, either directly or through build and own land, and has impacted the lives of over 1 million Jamaicans over the past 50 years. And whereas every time a Jamaican receives a key to a house built by the NHT or mortgage provided by the institution, the beneficiaries should be reminded that the Most Honorable Michael Manley established this transformational institution at a time when there was much resistance to its creation. And whereas its visionary policy has proven the naysayers wrong, as in every constituency and community across Jamaica, a housing scheme or house has been built out of funds from the NHT. And whereas wattle and daub, thatch houses and bamboo houses have been eradicated across Jamaica, and this is attributable to the transformational role of the NHT. And whereas the NHT has not just built houses, it has built communities and cities, as evidenced by the fact that the Sunshine City of Portmore was advanced through funding from the NHT under the San Jose Accord. And whereas in and around housing schemes built by NHT, there are schools, hospitals, health centers, fire stations, police stations, and sports facilities that have been constructed, thereby establishing more complete and cohesive communities. And whereas the NHT has been a beacon of hope in national development, as it has played a preeminent role in the construction industry, creating jobs for many thousands of Jamaicans and releasing billions of dollars into the economy on an annual basis, which filters down into communities, thus generating much needed economic activities across the country. Be it resolved that this Honorable Senate, 1, recognizes the 50th anniversary milestone and achievements of the NHT. 2, calls on the government to restore the NHT to its core mandate of providing affordable houses to the people of Jamaica. And 3, further calls upon the government to end the annual extraction of $11.4 billion from the NHT for budgetary support, and to ensure that these funds are directed at building affordable houses for contributors. May it please you, Mr. President.
Questions and answers to questions? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public Business Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I wish to move for the suspension of standing orders to allow me to take the 2 motions, notice of which I gave earlier.
Members would have heard the question. In favor?
Mr. President, I now move for the approval of the motions, notice of which I gave earlier.
Minister is referring to the motion in relation to Senator Ramon Small Ferguson and Senator Shireen Golden Campbell. Those in favor? Aye. Against?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is intended today to take through their concluding stages the bills known as the FID Amendment Act and the Financial Administration and Audit Act, Amendment Act, and we will take them in that order. Mr. President.
Thank you.
Oh. Okay. Act 2026, otherwise called the FID Amendment Act. Thank you. This bill is intended to enable the FID to more effectively engage in intelligence sharing with public bodies in Jamaica, as well as international financial intelligence departments or associations of such departments. Mr. President, it's important to place this bill in the context of the government's significant progress in strengthening Jamaica's anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism regime framework. And I'll generally refer to these as the AML-CFT framework. The government is committed and has demonstrated its commitment to the continuous work of strengthening our financial systems against illicit activity. And this is important for the security and ease of business transactions for our people at every level, from the smallest saver at a financial institution to the largest investor. And our efforts in this regard are largely guided by the benchmarks and parameters established through the AML-CFT regime evaluations that are undertaken by the Financial Action Task Force, which I'll refer to as the FATF, and its Caribbean subgrouping called the CFATF, the Caribbean FATF, which makes recommendations for any further actions and determines the level of risk vis-a-vis Jamaica systems and international partners as well. Members will recall that subsequent to Jamaica's FATF assessment in 2015, the mutual evaluation report that was issued in 2017 described a system that was worryingly deficient. Given the grave financial consequences for businesses and for individuals, and given our steadfast commitment as reference to achieving economic stability, the government worked assiduously across MDAs to strengthen the framework. And given the extent of the frameworks, of the reforms that were needed, you'll recall, including legal and regulatory changes and even a constitutional challenge which had to be resolved, Jamaica was actually placed on the FATF grey list in February 2020. And while this wasn't the worst case scenario, we could have been blacklisted had we not made some progress, it did signal to international financial and other institutions that special care should be taken when engaging or transacting with Jamaican entities and individuals. We therefore had agreed a 13-point action plan with FATF to address remaining AML-CFT deficiencies, and members may even recall that subsequent, we had also been concurrently listed on the EU's high-risk listing, because that is an automatic result of being listed by FATF. It took us till June 2024 to complete the work on that 13-point plan, and it was then that FATF congratulated Jamaica and stated that we were no longer subject to their increased monitoring process. We then continued to advocate and undertake diplomatic efforts with the EU to be removed from their listing, because although you are automatically listed as a result of a FATF listing, you are not automatically removed. And this is something that we continue to work with the EU on, because the inequities are clear to all, but the process has not yet been changed. The fact is, it took us until July 2025, after significant efforts, to ensure that we were delisted, just because of the process that exists on that side. And I explain this context just to remind why it is important for us to continue the work of ensuring that we maintain a review and hardening and continuous hardening of our systems against illicit activity, which means going back and improving things which had been done but need to be strengthened. Mr. President, in this context, of course, the responsibility for Jamaica's AML-CFT framework, it should be noted, is shared among the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Ministry of National Security and Peace, Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, and various units and departments within those ministries. I believe Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce is also a part. And there's a massive interministerial committee that seeks to ensure that, that not only does the review work continue, but the changes that are necessary to advance our progress is one that crosses all of the relevant sectors. Within the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, of course, is where we find the Financial Investigation Division, the FID, which was established as a department of government with sufficient independence and authority to effectively deal with investigation of the multidimensional and complex problem of financial crime. So in addition to the FID Act, the FID is also empowered and enabled under various other pieces of legislation, including the POCA, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Terrorism Prevention Act, acts to implement various UN Security Council resolutions with which this very chamber has contended, and the Corruption Prevention Act. Together with the FID's investigative role of investigating allegations of financial crime, in tandem with other national, regional law enforcement agencies, also we find the role of collaboration with international bodies in responding to transnational crime. Mr. President, Jamaica's FID was admitted into membership of the Egmont Group in 2014. And the Egmont Group facilitates international collaboration and cooperation between financial intelligence units. The FID is a financial intelligence unit where in literature that addresses this type of body. The goal of the Egmont Group is to provide a forum for FIUs around the world to obtain support, including the following: the expanding and systematic international cooperation in the reciprocal exchange of information, fostering better and secure communication among FIUs through the application of technology, fostering increased coordination and support among the operational divisions of the member FIUs, promoting the operational autonomy of FIUs, and promoting the establishment of FIUs in conjunction with jurisdictions with an anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, counter-proliferation financing program in place, or in areas with a program in the early stages of development. So, Mr. President, in the 2017 FATF MER, which I'd mentioned earlier when I was contextualizing this bill, Jamaica was rated as partially compliant for recommendation 40, which is the recommendation that deals with international cooperation. And this bill, containing the proposal to amend the FID Act, actually seeks to address the issues relating to independence and the effectiveness of that cooperation, that is the cooperation it undertakes in investigations. This will ensure that FID complies with FATF standards and the principles of Egmont which guide its membership. Furthermore, the amendment is also pertinent to ensure that Jamaica is better prepared for the 5th round of FATF mutual evaluation, particularly in the area of international cooperation, which is coming up later this year. Mr. President, if I could do a brief clause by clause of the Act, I will point out that Clause 2 seeks to amend Section 12 of the Act by, in paragraph A, deleting the marginal note and inserting a new marginal note to describe the purpose of provisions of Section 12, which is the exchange of information. In paragraph B, by deleting sections 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, and 8, and instead inserting new subsections 1 to 4. Listing in the new subsection 1 the regulatory counterpart and the purpose for which the FID may exchange information. It stipulates that the exchange may be with a local public body or a foreign financial intelligence department or association of such bodies, and for the purposes of investigation and prosecution of financial crime. Mr. President, stipulating in the new subsection 2 that FID may exchange information with the bodies mentioned before to enable the division or that body or financial intelligence department or association of departments to exercise regulatory functions, including the conduct of civil, criminal, or administrative investigations and proceedings to enforce laws administered. Mr. President, it seeks to require in the new subsection 4 that the FID is to enter into a memorandum of understanding or other arrangement with the public body or foreign financial intelligence department or association before the disclosure of information. It removes, Mr. President, the requirement for approval by the minister before the FID can enter into a memorandum of understanding or other arrangement, thus ensuring operational independence. So the original bill provided for ministerial approval of the entry into an arrangement, and now that will come out so that the FID, on the passing of this bill, will be entitled to, on its own assessment, enter directly into such arrangements. Nevertheless, Mr. President, in order to ensure accountability, provisions in subsection 4 also stipulate that any such memorandum of understanding or other arrangements entered into by the FID must be done in accordance with the Constitution of Jamaica, the laws of Jamaica, and government policy. And policy, of course, will include anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, counter-proliferation financing, secrecy, cybersecurity, data protection, even those referencing mutual assistance on criminal matters, sharing of forfeited property, and time frame for retention of information. So the policies that are broadly relevant, that provide the general policy guidelines within which arrangements can be made. Mr. President, it should be noted that the existing constitutional safeguards and foreign relations policies governing how or with whom FID enters into arrangements, and also relevant legislation, including but not limited to Data Protection Act, and the MLAT framework, that is our Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, that they collectively provide sufficient constraints and assurance that the FID is unlikely to have the room to engage in actions outside its legal and constitutional authority, including entering into MOUs with entities lacking requisite permissions and protections. So it is understood that the general framework is sufficiently robust to not require additional layers that make its actual investigations and engagements difficult or unduly difficult, and therefore constraining the undertaking of investigations. The aim is to allow them to investigate and to do so within the parameters of our laws and constitution. Mr. President, the new subsection 4, paragraph B, also stipulates a responsibility for confidentiality and permission by the FID before any further disclosure by any relevant party as defined in subsection 3. So that particular issue is also addressed. Mr. President, in paragraph C, it seeks to amend subsection 9 to ensure that regulations relating to the exchange of information for the purposes of investigation, the exchange of information for the purposes of investigation and prosecution of financial crimes, that they have parliamentary oversight by including the requirement for them to be subject to affirmative resolution so that they will come back here. Mr. President, this bill is an important amendment, as brief as it is, which seeks to ensure that FID exchanges information with its regulatory and investigative counterparts in an independent manner, that it is empowered so to do, such that it can carry out investigations while at the same time ensuring that proper protocols and accountability remain in place for disclosures and treatment of such information. Mr. President, the amendment is also critical to ensure that the FID continues to be eligible for membership in the Egmont Group and complies with international standards of the FATF, thus ensuring that our rating, specifically as it relates to Recommendation 40, which addresses international cooperation, is one in which we make continued progress on. In this context, having set this framework for the debate, Mr. President, I commend the bill for the approval by members and look forward to the contributions and support forthcoming. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much, Minister. Senator Tim?
Mr. President, we note the Minister's observation that to ensure accountability, information must accord with government policy as one of the provisions in the amendment. This is a provision which gives us cause for concern. Accountability, Mr. President, is not to the government or party in power, but rather to the people of Jamaica. When we think about good legislation, we want to think about it lasting the test of time and regardless of which administration is in power. In that vein, we are concerned that this emphasis on government policy is not in accord with our democratic concerns for separation of power, concerns about executive overreach, which have been raised with this administration in the past, for instance, with the extension of SOEs, for instance, with the provision allowing for an acting Chief Justice, and also in provisions in the constitutional reform process that would effectively give the Prime Minister authority to decide on an executive president. We are concerned about oversight, and when thinking about law enforcement, we should be thinking with regard to the people's oversight and not oversight that relies on government policy as distinct, or should be thought about rather in terms of partisan politics.
Thank you very much. Anybody on this over here? That's it? Senator Scott Motley? Senator Tomlinson?
Let me say from the outset that maintaining Jamaica's membership in the Egmont Group of Financial Intelligence Unit is important in the efforts towards combating money laundering, terrorist financing, and other financial crimes. As we know, these are serious threats to our national security and our economic integrity. And Jamaica must remain a credible partner in the global fight against financial crime. And insofar as the amendments in this bill contributes to that outcome, the opposition supports broadly the objectives of the bill. My contribution today is not whether we should empower the Financial Investigations Division to fulfill its mandate, but as I see it, I want to see how we can empower the division to simultaneously ensure proper safeguards that protect the rights of Jamaican citizens and maintain accountability. So I want to do two things. I want to empower the FID, as this bill is doing, but I also want to ensure that there's still some sort of accountability mechanism in place, which I know, as good stewards of the law, you on that side would support me in doing. The issue is relevance. Section 2B of the bill inserts a new subsection 1 into subsection 12 of the Principal Act. This new provision authorizes the Chief Technical Director to give or receive information from a public body in Jamaica or a foreign intelligence department, and the actual wording is any information relevant to the investigation or prosecution of a financial crime. Now, Mr. President, I acknowledge that the amendment does require a memorandum of understanding to be in place before information can be shared. And this is found in the new subsection 4A, and it's an important safeguard, and we appreciate why it is in the bill. The MOU must be consistent with the Constitution and with the laws of Jamaica, as is clearly expressed in the bill. And it must include confidentiality undertakings, and these are proper requirements. The challenge I have with the drafting, though, is that there is no objective criteria for making what the determination of relevance is. So the MOU is like, a set of rules of engagement between the parties, and it says that we have a relationship and we trust each other and we'll keep the information confidential. And that's the framework that is guided by the MOU. But I think an alternative to what is being proposed is that there should be some degree of objective test as to what relevance constitutes. And I propose that we address this concern with what would be a simple amendment that would not compromise the operational flexibility of the Financial Investigations Division, but would add what I think is necessary clarity and accountability. And Minister who's piloting the bill, I propose that we insert a subsection here where it says, for the purposes of subsection 1, information shall be considered relevant to the investigation or prosecution of a financial crime only where there exists a reasonable suspicion that a financial crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed, and the information relates directly to that suspected crime. So the point is, I think that the classification of what relevance is too broad in its current drafting in the bill, and that there should be some degree of objective criteria that limits how variable the interpretation to relevance can be. And I think that that is an important part of protecting the accountability mechanism that we want in this sort of legislation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Minister? Minister? Oh, sorry. Senator Scott Motley.
Minister, I'm actually seeking a clarification at this stage because I too had a level of concern about the fact that the memorandum of understanding or other arrangement that is consistent with the Constitution of Jamaica and the laws of Jamaica and the government policy. And you have explained by pointing to various pieces of legislation and agreements what you mean by government policy. It's interesting, we had a conversation yesterday where we were about a joint select committee yesterday where we were looking at the possibilities down the road of something unfortunate taking place. And I wondered, Minister, if you had, in the drafting of the bill, it had been contemplated that there might be government policy which is at dissonance with the Constitution. Because yes, that's a point. That's a point I was going on to make. That government policy ought to be bound by the Constitution. And I wondered why this curious insertion of adding government policy, Constitution of Jamaica, and the government policy. Because there's a kind of dissonance about including government policy in that. And remember, you know, Minister, there have been many pieces of legislation brought by the government, formulated on government policy, which have been found to be unconstitutional. I just want to remind us that when one is planning, as you have said to me this morning, you have to also anticipate. And one has to anticipate that there is no government, certainly I hope not in Jamaica, which will stay in power forever. So that when you're contemplating how you frame the legislation, you have to also project if any kind of government, whether the one currently in office, whether another one or one formed by a third party or other, might create government policy or reflect government policy which is not in accordance with the Constitution. And I see the discussion. So let me go to NIDS, for example. NIDS was formulated based on government policy. And after substantial work was done to try and amend that piece of legislation, formulated on government policy, several amendments, so numerous I can't recall, I think 63 from the House and numerous from the Senate, it was still struck down as being unconstitutional in its entirety. So I am wondering, and the reason why I stood to speak was to ask you what would have informed the inclusion of that particular notion when the Constitution of Jamaica ought to capture the essential requirements for this piece of legislation to be effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott Motley. Senator Bernard.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The opposition, in broad terms, supports the amendment that is before the Honorable Senate this morning. But support for this amendment cannot be divorced from the high integrity of Jamaica's anti-money laundering architecture. And it is precisely here that the government's position becomes incoherent, if not incomplete. Mr. President, the government asks this Parliament to empower the FID to share intelligence more freely, locally and internationally, yet at the same time has abandoned its commitment to introduce unexplained wealth orders under the Proceed of Crimes Act. This contradiction should not stand. What value is improved intelligence gathering if the state lacks the legal tool to act decisively on that intelligence? What credibility does Jamaica project internationally when we strengthen cooperation mechanisms but retreat from one of the most direct instruments for addressing illicit enrichment? An unexplained wealth order does not replace investigation, it does not criminalize wealth, and it does not bypass due process. Rather, it is a tool that requires individuals in possession of assets grossly disproportionate to their known lawful income to account for the source of that wealth before a court. The irony, Mr. President, is striking. The government repeatedly pledged since 2020 to legislate unexplained wealth orders. The Prime Minister himself signed a national memorandum committing to their introduction. The Minister of National Security previously described the amendments to POCA to include unexplained wealth orders as on the road. Senior investigators within the FID have publicly stated that the existing POCA tools are no longer sufficient to give sophistication, given the sophistication of the modern money laundering architecture. Yet the government returned to tell us that unexplained wealth orders are no longer a priority, and the law is strong enough, and that constitutional concerns make reform inconvenient. Mr. President, constitutional complexity is not unique to Jamaica, nor is it a justification for legislative paralysis. Our jurisdictions, Commonwealth jurisdictions included, and other jurisdictions, have confronted similar charter-based concerns and designed carefully calibrated, judicially supervised, unexplained wealth order regimes that respect due process and will close glaring enforcement gaps. What is unacceptable is legislative abandonment disguised as prudence. This debate, Mr. President, does not occur in a vacuum. Public confidence in Jamaica's anti-corruption framework has been shaken, particularly in circumstances where investigative bodies have been unable to reach conclusions due to inadequate access to financial and lifestyle data. Unexplained wealth regimes exist precisely to address this gap. They shift from suspicion to explanation, they shift from allegation to accountability, they shift from secrecy to transparency. Mr. President, strengthening the FID without introducing unexplained wealth order creates the appearance of reform, but not in its substance. The opposition support effective, constitutional, and balanced anti-money laundering reform. But we are deeply concerned about the efficacy of a framework that collects more intelligence while tolerating unexplained wealth. It is on this basis that we seek responses for the following questions. What is the practical endpoint of this expanded intelligence if unexplained wealth remains legally untouchable? Can the Minister explain how criminals are expected to account for unexplained assets under the current Proceeds of Crime Act? Has the Cabinet commissioned a formal constitutional opinion on unexplained wealth order, or are these subjective speculations? Senior investigators at the Financial Investigation Division have said POCA tools are no longer sufficient. Does the government disagree with its own enforcement professionals, or can the Minister say how many active money laundering cases involve assets that cannot be effectively addressed under the POCA provision? How does the government respond to cases where investigations stall due to the lack of lifestyle and expenditure data? And does this not deepen the perception that powerful individuals remain structurally insulated? And finally, Mr. President, will the government commit, yes or no, to tabling poker amendments on unexplained wealth order in this parliamentary year? And if not now, when? Mr. President, Jamaica deserves better, this parliament can do better, and the Senate must insist on it. If it please you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, President. With your permission, I'd just like to contribute a little to this debate. I hope my voice will hold. Firstly, President, the bill allow for the sharing as they exist in law with public bodies. But we need to identify what a public body is. The Integrity Commission, for example, is a public body. And there is a memorandum which allows for the sharing of information between the Integrity Commission or any other public body, but the Integrity Commission and the FID. We've seen in recent time members of the cabinet challenging submissions and reports from the Integrity Commission. And now I'm seeing in this bill something about government policies. Now, who is responsible for formulating policy? The chief policy under the policy formulators under the Constitution is the cabinet. Now, members of the cabinet are challenging the Integrity Commission. Is it not conceivable that the cabinet could develop policy about how it treats reports to our relationship with the Integrity Commission? I believe that, as Senator Scott Martley said, that whilst we have the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the country, and its clause says laws of Jamaica, those are passed by the Parliament. Policies developed not in the Parliament, but through the cabinet. So it is conceivable that the cabinet could override, through policy, decisions of the Parliament, and that creates a constitutional issue. But it can and does and could happen. And so one would expect that what the minister said, data processing policy, there's a law governing data processing, and all the other policies that she outlined are covered by specific laws passed by the Parliament. And therefore, this clause, which allows for government policy, is an override of the constitutional duty of the Parliament to set laws. And I personally is opposed to that clause. Think, Senator Gill, if that clause was in a bill like the Labor Relations and Industrial Dispute Act, which says, in accordance with government policy, then you couldn't challenge anything because government policy declares. In the LRIDA, there's a clause called the national interest. That's not put in this bill about national interest. What we're seeing is government policy. Government policy is a tenuous thing. Here today, change tomorrow, change next week. We don't have to wait for a change of government to have changes in government policy. What if an intelligence agency abroad wishes to know about the Kroll report, which they are entitled to under the MOU? But some government policies decide, you know what? We don't want to this information to be shared, even though it's contrary to the laws of the country. Government policy then becomes something that overrides the laws of Jamaica, override the Constitution of Jamaica. And Senator Scott Martley so aptly put it. There have been even laws arising from government policy, but passed by the parliament, that have been struck down as unconstitutional. So to elevate a policy now to something that governs the FID, when the Constitution allows it, the laws of Jamaica passed by the Parliament, Houses of Parliament, assented to by the Governor General. With those in place, how then do we insert in this bill this clause about policies of government? Policies on which there may be major national disagreements. Policy which not even the government side in the parliament may support. And so the independence of parliament is at stake. The independence of the parliament is at stake with something being put in the legislation about in accordance with government policy. And I say this against the background that it's clear to me that the removal of the minister's approval is not something that is unique to us. It seems to be part of the international relationship to take the politics out of law enforcement. And so the minister is removed. But somehow we're replacing the minister, who is a major main proponent of policies in that ministry. We now remove the minister's approval, but we're now inserting something through the back door called government policies. What's the difference between that and the minister's approval? So we're just changing it around to insert in law enforcement political interference. And I am opposed to that clause. I urge the minister and her team to delete that clause, and the laws of Jamaica, the Constitution, are sufficient guardrails. When we add another branch that is tenuous, and there's no certainty to what policy may be today as against tomorrow or yesterday, when we insert that into the legislation, we are allowing for the potential of abuse. We are allowing for bad governance. And I urge, in the spirit of cooperation, I too, like my colleagues, support the intent of the bill in general, but I disagree, vehemently disagree, with a clause which says government policy. Government policy, if you have confidence in those policies, bring them to the parliament. Have them approved. Have them approved by way of legislation. So they form part of the laws of Jamaica. And it is against that position that I signal my support for the rest of the bill, but I am opposed to that clause which speaks to government policy, and I urge the minister to consider it. I make this point because I remember, President, when we debated the NIDS bill, there was a clause in the NIDS bill which said, you know what? We can change any law by order. That was a clause in the NIDS bill, you know. I pointed it out, I opposed it, and thankfully the government deleted it, said it was no longer necessary in the NIDS law. And even with that deletion, the NIDS law was struck down by the court in its entirety, as Senator Scott Martley pointed out. Another issue why this is potentially abusive, this clause about government policy. I remember a matter, and in this law, you needed to have gone to the Attorney General to report things to the Attorney General. In a non-financial situation, criminal case, allegation of gun running, of drug dealing, gun running, the Constitution and the laws of Jamaica allow for the cooperation. You might remember former Commissioner of Police Audit Lewin speaking about Corporal, or was it Constable Red Herring? And there was a big dispute over whether or not intercept of communication could be shared. Interestingly, the government has since brought such legislation to Parliament, supportive of what the NICE was about in the past. But I come back to the gun running and drug trafficking matter. The Constitution and the laws of Jamaica allowed for extradition proceedings to go. At that time, the government policy was, to put it bluntly, the Constitution did not start clicking it. In other words, the government was in conflict with the Constitution and the laws of Jamaica. The policy. They relented. They relented eventually. And the extradition went on, the cooperation went on
Senator Brown,
in accordance with the Constitution.
Senator Brown, we appreciate the extradition, but you need to stick to the legislation.
That's what I'm doing, and I'm trying to explain,
You said that you oppose the particular clause vehemently, and I've heard you. So you need to just wrap up.
And I'm explaining why I further oppose it.
No, but you explained it 2 times
what I'm
already.
saying is that it is possible for government policies in the relationship we have with overseas partners and even local partners like the Integrity Commission. It is possible for government policy to be in conflict with the legislation.
You said that 3 times already, Senator Brown.
I am glad, and I hope repetition becomes the mother of knowledge and agreement, and that we can therefore, on that basis, accept that there is a flaw in this legislation, and that we can together work to improve it by removing that offensive clause about government policy must be adhered to, when the policy ought to be in the legislation and in the Constitution, and we have seen evidence of conflict between policy and laws and Constitution. May it please you, Mr. President, and at least my voice held up for this session. Thank you very much.
Yes, it pleases me very much. Thank you very much, Senator Brown. Minister, I'm sorry. Senator Golden Campbell. And you have risen out of turn, but I know that there's an explanation for it.
Mr. President, it wasn't my intention to speak today, but I think there are some matters that were raised just now that
Senator Golden Campbell, it was not my intention to ask the minister to respond to a number of questions put by Senator Bernard because they were not relating to the legislation that is before us. So I just said the same thing to you.
Mr. President, in my very first remark, I want to commend the Finance Ministry, the Minister, and the government for the amendments to this FID Act. I noted, Mr. President, the debate that ensued in the lower house and some of the questions raised there. And so I took a fairly rigorous look at the bill and sought to respond to those questions that I, at the time, thought had merit. And I no longer think so Mr. President. Let me address, however, before I make those remarks, let me address some comments that I have heard in the Senate today. Mr. President, the FID Act, like many of the legislation similar to the FID Act, have arisen because of changing circumstances in the global environment. And those circumstances, Mr. President, even with the initial passage of this act, continue to evolve as technology and the movement of nefarious entities and persons across the globe continue to evolve in relation to the response of law enforcement nationally and internationally. So, to be very clear, even our Constitution, which we have for some long time been talking about amending, even our Constitution, there is no legislation, Mr. President, that lasts the test of time, nor should any legislation be intended to do that. We are an evolving society, we are an evolving world, and by virtue of that, from time to time, we have to look at our laws to ensure that they are consistent with the direction in which the country wishes to go. So our legislation, instead of being static and steeped in the past, must itself evolve with time. Mr. President, much ado has been made about the insertion of the term government policy in Clause 2 of the bill. And to be clear, Mr. President, it is Clause 2, which amends Section 12 of the Principal Act, inserting a new subsection 4, which authorizes the disclosure by the Chief Technical Director under two circumstances, where the Chief Technical Director and the relevant party have a memorandum of understanding between them, and that memorandum of understanding is consistent in one, with the Constitution and the laws of Jamaica, and two, government policy. And I've heard my colleagues on the other side take issue with that term, government policy. But the clause does not stop there, Mr. President, because it continues. The memorandum of understanding, which must be consistent with the Constitution and with government policy, must be that which concerns the exchange of information of the kind contained in the disclosure. And so, Mr. President, the focus that has been put on government policy is a little, I must admit I don't quite understand it. Government policy is not an arbitrary term. It's not a term that Senator Johnson Smith can give new definition to, any more than it is a term that anybody who sits in the cabinet can give new definition to. There is a process by which government determines its policy and publishes that policy to the nation. Mr. President, quite often, and it is true to say that the legislation reveals government policy. Government policy is what eventually what eventually informs and forms law. But it is not every bit of government policy that becomes legislation. Government policy gives us, the citizens, the information we need to know what direction our elected representatives who form the majority, who become government and make up the cabinet, it gives us the information to know what direction they're taking us in. And there are other forms of government policy other than legislation, Mr. President, such as white papers, such as national publication of policy issues. The Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport quite often lays in the House of Representatives documents outlining her policy on gender, sports, etc., etc. So the assertion of my colleagues on the other side, suggesting that government policy is some sort of nefarious term, has some sort of closeted meaning and definition, is really, Mr. President, a little disingenuous, because we all know what government policy is. And it is true to say, Mr. President, that government policy is not divorced from the Constitution and laws of Jamaica. And government policy must comply with the Constitution and the laws of Jamaica. So, Mr. President, let me deal with this issue that was raised, and the example that was given was the NIDS bill, and I'm not shying away from that, because the fact of the matter is, where government policy, whether it be policy or law, finds itself incongruent with the Constitution, there are safeguards and remedies for that. And one of those, Mr. President, at the most extreme, is the court, the Supreme Court of Jamaica. We have a system, Mr. President, that checks us along the way. And if we can't check ourselves, then there is a third branch of government that checks us. So to suggest that you remove the term government policy because there may be some nefarious use of it is completely inconsistent with allowing a government to do what it has been elected to do, to move its people in a particular direction. This bill, Mr. President, is about the sharing of information, not just in relation to local entities, but also in relation to international entities. And how we share with international entities is not a feature of our Constitution. It is a feature of government policy, and government must have the ability to determine who we're going to be talking to abroad. So this clause, Mr. President, I think is important, because it is not, the absence of it would suggest that all one would need to do in crafting a memorandum of understanding between the Chief Technical Director and a relevant party is to go look at the Constitution and laws and see where that memorandum of understanding complies or is consistent with it. But there are documents, there are pathways that the government has chosen where government policy also needs to be checked to ensure that a body like the FID is not entering into a memorandum of understanding that is inconsistent with where the government is seeking to take the country. Mr. President, I'm going to say one last thing on this, and it's really just one statement. Contrary to what may be suggested or may have been suggested, government policy is not equivalent to party politics. Mr. President, the Financial Investigations Divisions Act
Senator Tomlinson. Senator Tomlinson. When you were speaking, nobody didn't interrupt you, you know.
Mr. President, if you will permit me to invite the Senate to look at the Principal Act, look at the objects of the Principal Act. Mr. President, at the heart of the objects of this Act, and permit me to read, objects of this Act is to establish a Department of Government with sufficient independence and authority to effectively deal with the multidimensional and complex problem of financial crime and confer upon it the responsibility to, and I'm going to read the last function here, exercise its functions with due regard for the rights of citizens. Mr. President, the FID is not at large to interpret government policy or follow any government policy that could possibly, in the clouds of that, be inimical to its citizens. The FID must exercise its functions with due regard for its citizens. Mr. President, the issue was raised in the lower house, and if you permit me to transfer it here, although it hasn't been raised on that side this morning. And the reason is, Mr. President, because I'm not quite sure that it was answered in the House, and I would presume to support my colleague to respond to it here. The subsection 4 of Clause 2, amending Section 12, Section 4 of the proposed Section 12 at paragraph B says that the Chief Technical Director, in recognizing his authorization to make a disclosure, must be satisfied of two things, one thing or two things. And the first is that the party has adequate confidentiality protocols to protect the information that is being shared with them. And the clause says, or, in the case of a disclosure permitted, the information to be disclosed to the relevant party is required for the purposes of the party's functions. And I raise this, Mr. President, because the Leader of the Opposition made quite a bit about it elsewhere. But I think perhaps he had not sufficiently looked at subsection 2 of that clause, in which the Chief Technical Director, in being empowered to share information either with a public body or with a foreign financial intelligence department, can do so, Mr. President, where the information is necessary to enable the division or the body or association of departments to exercise regulatory functions, including the conduct of civil, criminal, or administrative investigations and proceedings to enforce laws administered by the division, etc. In other words, Mr. President, so that I don't lose my countrymen and women in the maze of the legislation, the Chief Technical Director must be satisfied that the party that they're sharing the information with either needs it for their, either needs it because it's required by their functions, their regulatory functions, or it is required by their regulatory functions and they have sufficient confidentiality, safeguards. So in other words, he cannot decide to share the information simply because there are confidential safeguards in place if the information is not required by that body to carry out their functions. And so I wanted, Mr. President, the opportunity to clear that up. And Mr. President, before I take my seat, let me just, I don't know if I want to caution because that sounds a little arrogant and that's not usually my way. But you know, English is what I was taught in school. And there are some words that have evolved to have different kind of meaning, like dog. You know, you can be a dog as a pet, and you can be a dog as in dog, my brother, apparently. Relevance is not one of them. Relevance still means what relevance means. So while I appreciate my colleagues' overlook at the word relevance, it still means something related to, something important to. It still means that the matter must be contained in or annexed to. It still means that there cannot be a wide berth between the two issues for it to be relevant. So I caution us when we make statements that we're not redefining. In the same way we want to redefine government policy, we also want to redefine the meaning of relevance. Mr. President, it has the meaning the dictionary gave it. That hasn't changed. I want to also comment to my colleagues, and I heard my colleague, Senator Tomlinson's suggestion of an amendment to something about reasonable suspicion that a financial crime has been, and that was, I think, attached to his redefining of the word relevance. Mr. President, the FID is the Financial Investigations Division, a department of government. It is not a law enforcement agency. It cannot arrest. It cannot charge. And I think it's important because these words, reasonable suspicion that a financial crime has been or will be or is being committed, is a standard that only a law enforcement entity can engage. It is a law enforcement entity that will determine whether or not they need to imminently move in to arrest and to charge someone. I'm not a criminal law attorney, Mr. President, but I think I understand the use of that standard. Mr. President, I led you astray. I have one more point to make. Senator Brown has one of the most, what would I call it, enviable skills that I have seen in anyone in all of my years, and that is the ability to repeat something to ad nauseum so that you almost believe that what he's saying is so. Mr. President, the sharing of information between the FID and any other body, and any concern that could arise there, is in no way connected to any example that Senator Brown wants to give about the Integrity Commission. And the example he's referring to, of course, is the referral of the Integrity Commission to a report, referral of the Integrity Commission of a report to the FID. Mr. President, I maintained then, I maintained yesterday, I maintain today, and I am going to maintain tomorrow that that referral was contrary to the Integrity Commission's Act and should not have happened. Mr. President, this bill is not a difficult bill to support. The removal of the minister to allow the FID independence and autonomy, the inclusion of safeguards in terms of the Constitution and government policy, which the Chief Technical Director must be mindful of in entering into memoranda of understanding, the ability, Mr. President, to ensure that the party with whom the CTD is sharing information itself has certain safeguards in place. Mr. President, this bill fulfills the objects of the principal act that the FID and the Chief Technical Director must be mindful of, and that is that it exercises its functions with due regard for the citizens of this great country. May it please you, Mr. President.
Minister.
It's all right. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to colleagues on both sides for their participation in this debate, because indeed, even as we have differing views, this is the point of the Chamber of Review. It is to share perspectives, and even where we do agree to disagree, it is important that the people of Jamaica understand that their concerns are being thought about deeply in this chamber. I want to thank in particular Senator Golden Campbell for her intervention just now, which not only clarified issues raised in the debate in this House, but those beyond. And that's helpful to the listening public again, and it helps to educate and expand perspectives where matters have not been met in one space, that they're met in another. And I want to thank her for taking the time to do that research and to clarify the perspectives raised. Mr. President, just a couple points so as not to gild the lily or to maybe unduly prolong the debate. But I did want to respond to the express language that was used early in the debate on that side, and that was to say that the thought was expressed that the bill was not, and the inclusion of the reference to policy in particular, was not in accordance with democratic principles, including the separation of powers, and that they admitted the, in fact, partisan politics. I wanted to just expressly reject that perspective and to say that it reflects a complete misreading of the language set out and the broader context of the bill. I want to make the point that policy, government policy, is at the heart of the efforts to make Jamaica compliant with international best practice as found by the FATF international evaluations that have been carried out since 2015 and which we have been working on. Government policy allows for the agility to adopt international best practice where it has not yet been implemented here, but it is and would be consistent with the Constitution of Jamaica and the laws of Jamaica. And it is our efforts today which are seeking to expand that by removing ministerial constraint for the perception which it causes, not necessarily intervention, but the perception of possible intervention. So I want to make it quite clear, crystal clear, that what is being done here is to ensure that the widest and most effective guardrails of the Constitution of Jamaica and laws of Jamaica are being supplemented by policy insofar as they are required for the implementation of the purposes of the legislation, which is to allow for effective investigation of financial crimes, the hardening of our financial systems against illicit activity, the prevention of such crimes, and the provision for international collaboration. So everything that is being discussed is within that context and falls within that regime, Mr. President. So I want to us to not have any misconception about that. A mindset that gives the perception that policy is an individual minister's, thought on a morning is almost the sense that's here. The fact that tribal politics was even raised, or partisan politics, ignores the reality that policy is at the very heart of democracy. When the people vote in a government, they vote them in on their policies. There's nothing partisan or tribal about having a policy. It is a part of the democratic process. It's at the very heart of it. And the fact that it is referenced in conjunction with the Constitution, there's absolutely nothing to fear about that. So again, it's perhaps a mindset issue. Mr. President, I know you gave me some guidance earlier about the unexplained wealth order, but I just want to make one small point. I want to thank Senator Bernard for raising the issue, because it gives me the opportunity to state publicly that Jamaica's asset recovery regime, and the FID is the ARA, is the Asset Recovery Authority in Jamaica. It has been assessed by FATF and found to be sufficiently robust. And it was a part of the assessment based on which Jamaica was taken off the list. The unexplained wealth orders have been advised to the government, and this has been said before, but you give me the opportunity to say again, to be unconstitutional because it reverses the burden of proof. They have been unable to find a workaround that allows for the criminal act to be found, and therefore the civil regime is what has been used, together with the investigative powers of the FID, which continue to robustly work on these matters together with MOCA. So I want to, on the point of relevance, I think there's nothing more to say. I think that was effectively addressed by Senator Golding Campbell. And in this context, Mr. President, I just want to say that we remain committed to ensuring that our systems are hardened against in illicit activity, whether under the CFT or the AML or the anti-proliferation regimes, that we continue our work in this regard. I want to thank all the ministries, departments, and agencies and other important stakeholders, including the Bank of Jamaica, for their tireless work on this regard. And I want to mention in particular the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee, the NAMLC, which we have strengthened and which continues to provide general oversight of the AML CFT policy in Jamaica, ensuring adherence to the FATF recommendations, together with those of CFATF. I want to thank also our bilateral and multilateral partners for their collaboration. We continue to work across the region and nationally to ensure that indeed our systems and the systems within which they operate, that they remain robust, and that our safeguards maintain our positive standing in the global economic and financial systems. So in this context, Mr. President, I ask for the second reading of the bill, and that we move to committee.
Thank you, Minister. The question is, thank you, Minister. The question is that the bill, an act to amend the Financial Investigation Divisions Act, be read for a second time. Those in favor? Against?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Financial Investigations Division Act, read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Thank you very much, members. I put clause 1. Those in favor? Against? I put clause 2. Those in favor? Thank you very much. Senator Scott Motley. Put on your microphone, please.
24A1, and the amendment which I'm proposing is that government policy should be deleted.
Thank you very much.
24A2, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I see where it is. It would be the Senator. I'm putting the amendment, you know. I beg your pardon? I'm sorry, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to respond to say, Mr. Chairman, we note the proposal that has been made, but we think that the matter has been sufficiently expounded on in the debate, including the fact that the government believes that indeed its policy to actually implement these hardened financial systems are fundamental to the success of the bill, and therefore we will not be accepting the proposed amendment.
Thank you very much. So the proposal from Senator Scott Motley is that section 2(4)(a)(2) be amended by the removal of the word or the phrase government policy. That amendment has been proposed. All in favor?
Call for divide.
Madam Clerk? All right, so those in favor? Those against? The 1 minute, Senator Brown. Those against?
Again, I've called for divide.
Yeah, okay.
Once the
But I
motion
just
has been
needed to
put.
hear the... Okay. Okay, don't panic, Senator Morris.
President, just to be clear, we're voting now on Senator Scott Motley's motion,
No, you
which
are
is
not
to remove.
You are not voting because you can't vote.
I know, but I'm just clarifying, even though I'm not allowed to vote. Because, if I was voting, I'd vote yea for Senator Scott Motley's
Brown,
motion.
thank you very much. Go ahead, Madam, Mr. Clark.
Senator Anderson, Keisha Anderson.
I support what Donald Scott Motley has proposed.
You need to vote aye or nay.
Yes, aye.
Senator Rosemary Bennett Cooper.
Sorry, it's so sad.
Senator Alan Bernard.
Aye.
You don't need to turn on your microphone. You can just...
Senator Keith Duncan. Senator Fitzhenley. Senator Gale. Senator Golden Campbell. Senator Hill. Senator Johnson Smith. Senator Morgan. Senator Professor Morris. Senator Morris Dixon. Senator Scott Motley. Senator Sinclair. Senator Small Ferguson. Senator Tavares Hinson. Senator Dr. Thame. Senator Thompson. Senator Tomlinson.
Thank you very much, members. I do report the result of the divide as follows. 7 ayes, 10 noes, 2 members absent, 1 online. So the noes, in fact, have it. So I now put the clause number 2. Those in favor? Against? I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister?
Ask for third reading of the bill.
The question is that the bill be read for a third time. Those in favor? Against? Mr. Clark?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Financial Investigations Division Act, read for a third time and passed.
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, having completed the FID bill and thanking the members of the technical team who were present to support its passage and indicating to them that they're welcome to be released should they need to be, if they are not needed for the next bill. The other item before us, Mr. President, as indicated earlier, is the Financial Administration and Audit Amendment Act 2026. And this is a bill which has three basic aims: to remove the cap on the maximum amount that may be held in the National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund, the NNDRF, to cease mandatory annual transfers from the consolidated fund to the NNDRF once the balance is at or above 10 billion Jamaican dollars, and to remove Section 13A1A1, which makes provision for the transfer of $200 million from the consolidated fund to the NNDRF during the financial year 2023 to 24. Mr. President, by way of background, I remind that the NNDRF was established pursuant to the Financial Administration and Audit Amendment Act 2024. Members of this Honorable Senate may recall that the establishment of the fund was intended to provide a facility consisting of transfers or issues from the consolidated fund principal bank account, funds from the triggering of any natural disaster instruments that may exist, and funds from any other indicated source of flows. The NNDRF enables an immediate financial response to a disaster affecting Jamaica that either had a fiscal impact equivalent to or greater than 1.5% of GDP, and which triggers a disbursement under a natural disaster instrument held by or on behalf of the government of Jamaica. And I know that several colleagues here recall when this bill was passed, and one would not have contemplated that we would have had the type of disaster that we have just been through. And in fact, the establishment of the $10 billion threshold seemed, it seemed an ambitious threshold. And here we are. Less than 2 full years later, we are here again. And this is the nature of legislation. Mr. President, with regards to natural disaster instruments, members will also recall that the government built a multi-layered, proactive disaster risk financing framework, which included Jamaica's catastrophe bond, and you recall that we were the first small island, and in fact, the first small state to have sponsored its own catastrophe bond, one which Melissa has given great global visibility, Policies with the Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility, the CCRIF, which many of us will recall for years, not only Jamaica, but countries across the Caribbean had been complaining that the CCRIF was constructed in such a way that made it practically impossible to draw down under it. And I recall when Antigua and Barbuda had their massive hurricane, and that absolutely, Barbuda was completely destroyed and Antigua significantly damaged. And even then, when they drew down, it was a drop in the bucket of what was needed to rebuild. But Jamaica renegotiated our CCRIF arrangements to work along a very innovative structure with a grid that allowed us to be able to not only claim for flood impacts, but to be able to claim in small geographic areas, which beforehand had never been available to us. So we have actually delivered a new model to the rest of the region. Came from government policy. It did. Thank you for that intervention. But again, so there's much that has been done to make it accessible for the purpose, which allows and has allowed for funds to be drawn down on and to be placed in the NNDRF for those who are unable to make the connection between the points. It's also one of the things we have done as well is to enter into various credit contingent claims with the IDB and the World Bank Group, which again have become extremely relevant post Melissa. Mr. President, 13A1 of the FAA Act provides that the maximum amount of the fund, taking into account all of the sources, those of which I've just named, including amounts, for emphasis, received from the triggering of natural disaster instruments, that should be $10 billion. Mr. President, clearly, Hurricane Melissa, one of the strongest hurricanes to form in the Atlantic, and the strongest on record to make landfall in Jamaica, clearly triggered several instruments, resulting in a flow of resources well in excess of $10 billion. So this bill seeks to remove that cap, remove the $10 billion as a cap. It's there, remains as a threshold for ceasing the mandatory payments of $400 million, but it's no longer a cap. The bill seeks to cease the mandatory annual transfers, which I've just referenced as well, once the NNDRF is at or above $10 billion. And it also seeks to remove that clause that provided for the transfer of $200 million in the 2023-24 period, as the fund actually was not operational at that time. It was intended to be 24-25, but it's not needed. It is to therefore to be deleted to clean up the bill. Mr. President, there's only one clause for me to reference, and clause 1 addresses the preliminary issues, short title, etc. But then clause 2 expressly provides for the deletion of 13A1 and its substitution in paragraph A by the following. The words issues from the consolidated fund principal bank account of not less than, sorry, it's probably better for me to just read the full. Is to say that there is hereby established a National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund, which shall consist of issues from the consolidated fund principal bank account of not less than $400 million annually, so, however, that no issue shall be required under this paragraph out of an amount that would result in the National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund exceeding $10 billion. So, Mr. President, using the example of Melissa, it's clear that in order to accommodate funds triggered by disasters of similar scale, possibly, or even less, that the steps to be taken under this bill are logical. We must be agile and responsive to the realities that confront us, and the amendments proposed today provide an appropriate level of flexibility. It's in this context, therefore, that I seek the support of members on both sides of this Honourable Senate in passing this bill. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Ferguson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise this afternoon to participate in the debate on the proposed amendments to the Financial Administration and Audit Act that are before us today. Thank you, Marshall. I do so fully conscious of the context in which these amendments are being brought to this Honorable Senate, and it doesn't escape my consciousness as well the continued lived realities facing many Jamaicans at this moment in the wake of the crisis that the Minister just mentioned, Hurricane Melissa. But I want to take us back a bit to really set the context in which these amendments are being proposed. Not so long ago, in June 2024, Hurricane Beryl affected Jamaica, causing widespread damage across the entire island, right? And in particular, several southern parishes faced the brunt of it. Estimated losses at that time were north of 30 billion Jamaican dollars, about 2% of GDP at that point. And it's the same story that we're facing today. Damage to critical infrastructure, disruption of lives and livelihood, agricultural output being halted, homes destroyed, tens of thousands of Jamaicans at that time being uprooted by the passage of Hurricane Beryl. And even as recovery in relation to Hurricane Beryl, for many, was still a hope, the country was struck by an even more devastating disaster. Right? On October 28th, as we know, Hurricane Melissa made direct landfall, and as the Minister has said, broke all records with respect to devastation of events of that nature here in Jamaica. The losses were much greater. The initial estimates still stand at about $8.8 billion US, or 40% of GDP, right? Several times the size of Hurricane Beryl. And the externalities are still with us. The expected cost there is potentially north of $20 billion US in terms of loss of output. We're still struggling to recover in relation to key infrastructure. Utilities are still out of place, and entire communities remain displaced in the worst affected parishes. Mr. President, unfortunately, these two events, as devastating as they are not isolated shocks for Jamaica. They form part of a deeply troubling pattern, and it is the reality for us in this region. Of the more than 40 Category 5 hurricanes recorded in this region, in the Atlantic Basin, approximately 1/3 of them have occurred in the last decade. Right? It's telling a story. In fact, the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season equaled the number of Category 5 hurricanes that would have occurred in one single season. Again, telling a story. And the science is telling us plainly that these storms are becoming more intense, more destructive, and unfortunately, more frequent within our region. And Jamaica's vulnerability to these events are structural. It's based on where we're placed. We sit squarely in the hurricane belt. At the same time, we also sit along a very active earthquake fault system. I don't want us to forget that. And documented history of damaging seismic events is there. Right? So the combination, Mr. President, of these meteorological and geological risks place Jamaica among the more vulnerable small island developing states globally. Disasters for Jamaica are unfortunately not rare anymore. Right? They are a part of the reality that we have to plan for, and foremost when we look at the risks facing our nation. Several months after the passage of Hurricane Melissa, the truth is that the reality that many Jamaicans are facing is in stark contrast to some of the pronouncements from the government and the congratulatory tone in relation to the pace and significance of the recovery. Beyond the press releases and the communication, the reality on the ground tells a very different story. There are families, Mr. President, who remain without a permanent roof over their heads. There are children, Mr. President, whose education has been halted by this crisis. There are people who have no access to basic amenities, potable water, electricity, public services. Many Jamaicans, Mr. President, are speaking in their own words and saying that they have not yet felt the arm of recovery extended to them from the state in a meaningful way. Right? It's against this backdrop, Mr. President, that while we welcome the removal of the cap, which is a matter of practical fact by virtue of events past, the release of funds in excess of the $10 billion, we believe, Mr. President, that it's disappointing that we have not taken this opportunity to become more constructive in relation to this fund in the face of the realities that we have just experienced. Mr. President, at a time when recovery in relation to our latest crisis is far from complete, the vulnerability that we suffer is most visible by virtue of what has happened. And the risks that we're facing seem to be escalating as opposed to diminishing. I believe, Mr. President, that we're missing the mark with respect to the extent of the amendment before us today, and we could become much more progressive in safeguarding the people of Jamaica from this mounting risk. Mr. President, while the amendment does not prevent the fund from going beyond the $10 billion, it in fact allows it, there is an important change, Mr. President, that I'd like to encourage the government to re-examine. And that is once the threshold is reached, the government relieves itself from the obligation to continue contributing to the fund from the consolidated fund. That distinction, Mr. President, matters in our view, because it goes to the heart of the state's responsibility to the people of Jamaica in relation to defending against this risk. As the minister said, this allows for the fastest, most immediate, and most certain response under circumstances of crisis of this nature. Mr. President, in the real world of public finance, optionality, really, when it comes to funding, is rarely a neutral thing. Right? Where contributions of any nature are no longer mandatory, they become the subject of annual budget pressures, competing priorities, and political discretion. Experience tells us that in such circumstances, allocations are often deferred, diluted, or in many instances, omitted altogether. The effect is a shift away from some sort of rule-based discipline and framework which has served us well. We recently had a conversation about the fiscal rules, towards discretion. And in doing so, Mr. President, the government weakens the anchor that gives this fund credibility as a tool designed to protect Jamaican lives and livelihoods in the face of a crisis. The concern, Mr. President, is heightened when the threshold itself is considered against recent experience. The minister described the $10 billion at the time as being ambitious, but we have seen, Mr. President, that $10 billion, while it may sound substantial in isolation, it is modest when measured against the scale of the losses that Jamaican families and communities have experienced in the most recent crises I referenced before. In that context, Mr. President, allowing the state to step back from the mandatory contributions contemplated initially by the framework, it appears ill-timed, right, given what we have recently faced. And it leaves ordinary Jamaicans exposed, right, to benefiting less than they would have otherwise. Mr. President, it's not also sufficient, in our view, to suggest that there are other funding sources that can compensate for the withdrawal of mandatory contributions to this fund. The insurance arrangements and catastrophe bonds and contingent credit lines all have a very important role to play in a layered disaster risk management framework, but they are not the same as this fund. Right? They play a different role. Insurance depends on triggers, and we saw the experience in Hurricane Beryl where there was no trigger. Credit lines increase the public debt, which is something that we have limited appetite for in the present day. And external assistance, which we have benefited from in the wake of this crisis, is, however, often delayed or conditional, if it comes at all. The consolidated fund contribution, Mr. President, therefore, represents the clearest expression of the state's ownership of disaster preparedness and its duty to act decisively on behalf of the citizens of this country. There is therefore a broader fiscal message that could be embedded in this amendment, Mr. President, that deserves some careful reflection. Right? And remember, eyes are on us. By having an exit point from mandatory contributions, while the government may secure some short-term budgetary flexibility, it could do so at the potential cost of long-term resilience. Right? For a country as exposed as Jamaica, preparedness and defense against these risks must be consistent, dependable, and must have highest priority in the context of budgetary expenses. Because it's not some arbitrary balance sheet or set of numbers that gets affected under these circumstances. It's Jamaican households that bear the consequences when disaster strikes. Most importantly, Mr. President, this amendment might send a signal to the public, unintended or otherwise, that even as we struggle to recover from a significant crisis, the state is indicating that its preparedness to support investing in resilience and recovery has its limits. Right? And as we have said, limits that are not significant relative to the potential fallout from these crises. It indicates that the government is willing to take a step back from this particular tool at an unfortunate juncture. We on this side, Mr. President, therefore urges the government to reflect carefully on that potential message that it may be sending to the people of Jamaica at this time, and consider whether this is a moment to retreat in this way or to become even more constructive with respect to the measures of defense that we have against this risk that will continuously affect us given where we're geographically placed. Rather than creating a pathway to step back, there's an opportunity here for us to become more constructive, to strengthen the replenishment and continuity, and expand the various sources that could go into the National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund. This, Mr. President, in our view, will make it a more credible, durable instrument of recovery and resilience to benefit all Jamaicans. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ferguson. Minister? Minister Morgan? Senator Morgan?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate having regard to the proposed amendments to the Financial Administration and Audit Act. I believe these amendments are quite timely. I welcome the debate itself. Obviously, perspectives will diverge, but nevertheless, the thought and object behind the amendment that we have brought, we would not want them to be lost. Indeed, we want them to be uppermost in the minds of the Jamaican people. There's no denying, Mr. President, that as a small island developing state, situated where we are situated, near fault line, in a zone that sees serious storms from time to time, and having regard to the sheer reality that is climate change and the attendant adverse weather events, it's not so much a matter of if, but more so when. So it is incumbent on a responsible government, Mr. President, to continue to focus attention on getting its affairs and indeed its house in order so as to better withstand and to more effectively respond to exogenous shocks. As the senator opposite mentioned just now, it is true that adverse weather events, particularly strong storms, or I dare say hurricanes, are becoming increasingly intense, quite devastating in terms of impact and the sheer damage that they occasion. They are becoming increasingly unpredictable, and they're also more frequent, and as the Prime Minister likes to observe, they overlap. So in a time gone by, an adverse weather event would be a 1 in a 20-year phenomenon. It's not quite so these days. You may even have the situation of impact in the same Atlantic hurricane season. I wish to commend the administration, Mr. President, for its practicality, its pragmatism, and foresight in devising our National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund. Very, very important, Mr. President, because at the heart of putting in place, separate and apart from CRIF, which was always a facility, and separate and apart from even budgetary contingencies, having a discrete and dedicated fund insofar as the National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund helps to put the country in a position where in a more sustainable, in a more certain and responsive way, the government can respond to the vagaries of adverse weather events, such as Hurricane Beryl, or even in the more recent instance, the passage of Hurricane Melissa. And so, there is a robust framework in place, I would submit and contend. This robust regime entails such things as espoused earlier as the CRIF. The catastrophe bond would have been a part of the architecture. the NNDRF, and other financial solutions. Those with the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank come to mind readily. But in the main, these provisions put us in a position, Mr. President, to be fiscally resilient and demonstrably so. And we have seen it in relation to response to Beryl and more recently in response to the passage of Hurricane Melissa. Mr. President, the observation being made, certainly as I would have tracked the debate in the lower house and repeated this morning by the senator opposite, is essentially for the sequestering of funds, which the amendment that has been brought is seeking to obviate and depart from. And it's a very, very important move that has been made by the government. There's no suggestion that the $10 billion in the NNDRF is sufficient to respond to adverse weather events, which may cost exponentially greater sums, nominally and in real terms, than that. It is to be noted, however, that having regard to the exigencies of government, the determination that has been made by the administration at this time is that we are not going the route of, in any mandatory way, sequestering funds that could have otherwise gone to even attending to critical resilience building interventions, Mr. President, to ensure that households and communities across Jamaica are in a better position, whether in terms of roofing infrastructure, water harvesting, connectivity in terms of broadband and satellite, to better navigate and withstand the vicissitudes of adverse weather events, Mr. President. So, in this debate, there is the view, and we note it, that not setting aside in a mandatory way this 400 million Jamaican dollars will essentially have our response mechanism deprived of these funds. It's a view that I do not share, because although there's no mandatory obligation, the truth of the matter is that there is nothing preventing or constraining government from making contributions and provisions into the fund to prop up and continue to shore up the fund over time. So the fact of the matter is, based on the actions of this administration, certainly in the past, and the very DNA, the very makeup in terms of fiscal responsibility and doing things that are appropriate and sober from a financial and public finances management standpoint, Mr. President, those deeds of the past, I believe, must count for something. If it is that it is an administration that has taken us through such things as COVID, Hurricane Beryl, and is taking us through Melissa, the fiscal dexterity of the government, the fiscal history of the government must count for something, Mr. President.
Great policies. Great policies.
So, Mr. President, we know that at any budget season, in any budget season, when determinations are being made about the priorities, the fiscal priorities of the government of Jamaica, we have competing interests, we have competing obligations, and competing priorities even. And the truth of the matter is that the pie is not an inordinate, or I dare say, an infinite one. And therefore, the determination that has been made by the government is that as opposed to having funds being placed in an obligatory way in terms of being sequestered or set aside in a discrete way in the way it had been based on the previous regime that was in place, the one we're seeking to effect an amendment to, it will afford and accord the government greater degrees of fiscal latitude and dynamism to make determinations that will suit and serve the interests of the people of Jamaica at various points in time vis-a-vis the management of public finances. What does that look like, Mr. President, in real terms? When we speak about the national budget, and if you even contemplate nominally 400 million Jamaican dollars, you're speaking of resources that could help the most vulnerable among us, for example, in relation to the PATH program. We have seen images across social media and indeed in traditional media as to how constituents across Jamaica have clamored for the 20,000 Jamaican dollars per the Solidarity program. It speaks to foresight on the part of government, because we are unequivocal on this side, Mr. President, that all Jamaicans had to share in the burden of taking us to where we have been in terms of fiscal recovery and fiscal resilience as a country. And inasmuch as Jamaicans were called upon individually and collectively to take us to where we have been these past 10 years in relation to a better position from a fiscal standpoint, the people of Jamaica, those who are not captured on PATH, those who are not on the social pension or are not being provided for in any other window being made available by government, they too, Mr. President, must benefit from the dividends of our heavy lifting over the years as a country. And so when the government puts itself in a position where it doesn't sequester funds, but instead have the funds in real time and in real terms able and at its disposal to respond to national need, whether it is fixing and repairing roads in people's communities, be they farm roads, community roads, or main thoroughfares, providing more to the vulnerable among us, addressing challenges with respect to the delivery of public health care, security, or indeed education. These resources and the fiscal dynamism that the non-sequestering of funds affords government puts the people of Jamaica in a position to be well served. So we do not see the amendment that we're bringing as something that is inimical to the broader interests of the people of Jamaica. A key point to appreciate here, Mr. President, is that the members opposite will seek to isolate and bring into sharp focus the 400 million Jamaican dollars that will no longer be going to. Well, not that they won't be going to, but there's no obligation, there's no mandatory directive in relation to the 400 million. But as opposed to isolating and focusing on that particular aspect, Mr. President, it is to be noted that you have to look at our regime in an aggregate way, in a composite manner, because all of the different windows, when taken together, would suggest to us that Jamaica in 2026, as it was in 2025, is in a place that is far better relative to where we were years ago or even decades ago in terms of fiscal resilience and our capacity to withstand. From a wherewithal standpoint, we're in a better place, Mr. President. And therefore, I commend our former finance minister and the administration of which he was a part in relation to taking out that catastrophic bond with the World Bank, Mr. President. Very, very important development. It is also important to note that even while we have this NNDRF in place, that from time to time you will also have the government entering into agreements and arrangements that will serve to prop up and shore up our disaster risk financing efforts, our framework altogether. So those developments too must count for something. Mr. President, there are persons who, by virtue of their own fiscal fortunes, do not readily appreciate what the consolidated fund does, particularly for the most vulnerable among us. Because whenever we have threats of adverse weather events, there are some among us who may not quiver and shake in their boots in the way other Jamaicans in less auspicious circumstances and indeed less financially endowed conditions would have to contend with. With the passage of Hurricane Melissa, Mr. President, with the passage of Hurricane Melissa, it was the resources, the investments in the framework in terms of our National Disaster Fund and the architecture in general, which includes other elements, not just the NNDRF itself, but other provisions like CRIF and so on. It is those arrangements that have allowed for the response that we have had. And what did we see consequent on Hurricane Melissa? Jamaica's own standing and good name, certainly in the international community of nations, saw a number of humanitarian aid organizations coming to our assistance in relation to the delivery of reliable and appropriate nutrition solutions, hot meals in many instances, and we have to thank World Kitchens and the other partners for that kind of support. Mr. President, we also saw tens of thousands of care packages distributed. That was made possible by the fiscal coffers of the country. So even before the government went to tap the resources from Support Jamaica, we, having regard to contingencies in our budget, were in a position to make resources available to respond to the real needs and hardships being endured by our people consequent on the passage of Hurricane Melissa. So we don't need to be lectured to, Mr. President, in relation to doing right by the people of Jamaica, responding in ways that are practical, conscientious and compassionate, and of course, in the interest of the people of Jamaica, is in the DNA of this wholeness-led government, Mr. President. And so I wish to implore this chamber to support the amendments that have been brought. We note the variance of opinions vis-a-vis the cessation, as it were, of the 400 million Jamaican dollars mandatory transfer to the consolidated, to the NNDRF rather. But even while that is so, I wish to assure this chamber, and even more so, the people of Jamaica looking on, that in this government you have a responsible, well-reasoned and sober outfit serving as stewards of your affairs. And the truth of the matter is that we have demonstrated by our deeds, not words, that we are compassionate, caring for the most vulnerable among us, and at all times will be championing and advancing the interests of you, the people of Jamaica. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Minister? Minister, it's 1:20. Or thereabouts. Well, it's 1:20 somewhere.
So, President, at 1:20, might it be, might the standing orders be suspended to allow us to
I just don't want to interrupt the flow of the
to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day.
Members would have heard that question. Those in favor? Minister? Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Anderson. And do not believe that we have not observed your Bob Marley birthday scarf.
My son was to be born on the 6th of February, but he came on the 7th, so it's a special day for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Anderson. I apologize for not seeing you.
That's okay. May I seek permission to speak from a seat other than my own?
Maybe that's why I didn't recognize you, of course. You can.
Mr. President, I rise because I think it is important to make my contribution to this review of the Financial Administration and Audit Act. I don't intend to be long, but I would like to share two points. I think the maturity of us as a people is evident in the layered approach to disaster risk management that we have employed. And I commend the successive administrations that have sought to ensure that we have strengthened our ability to respond to natural disaster. It is for that reason, Mr. President, that I am wondering why we would want to take a step back now, and I will explain what I mean. So I understand, as the government senator that just spoke posited, that it is, when you're looking at a budget, you have to make decisions around what you spend now in the best interests of your people, but you also have to think ahead and show vision and foresight also in the best interests of people. So I'm thinking that whereas we may not want to indicate an amount to be sequestered annually, I don't think we need to throw the proverbial baby with the bathwater, and we may want to say that over a period of time, say in a 2-year period, there's a specific amount that should be sequestered. It is because, Mr. President, I fear that in the absence of that, then you rely on well-thinking that, depending on the priority of the day, may disappear. So I want to put it to the Minister for consideration that we set aside a certain amount over maybe a 2-year period, so it will give the government room in this immediate year one, but say by year 2, a set amount must come from the consolidated fund to the fund, and I'd like it to be contemplated. Mr. President, I also want us to focus a little bit on a part that I think is missing from the framework. And the part that I think is missing is a focus on governance and accountability. Because I do believe, Mr. President, that accountability can be the remedy sometimes that will help to heal the wounds of mistakes or poor governance. And so I think as we develop the Act, that we should give consideration to the oversight aspects of it and tend to legislate some of that. And what do I mean, Mr. President? I think the recent, even though early report from the Auditor General flagging the oversight weaknesses in the governance framework of the National Disaster Fund should not be ignored. You know, I think that is important that as we continue to show our maturity, we also show our maturity in the reporting on the fund. I think we need to legislate to some extent that we should have at minimum annual or quarterly reports on the balances and the drawdowns. I think we should have annual reports on the performance. I am not quite clear on the management of the fund, but the performance of the fund, the investment strategy, for example, so that we can ensure that as we continue to put money into the fund, that the fund is actually growing at a rate that will help to compensate for the cost of disasters in the future. I take it not for granted that we will enjoy the same level of support from international organizations. As we did say, the region is being faced with more and more disasters, and we're not going to be the only small island that has to rely on the generosity of other well-thinking world citizens. And so, Mr. President, I think that we need to ensure that governance and the what would I say now, the performance indicators that will tell us how we're doing as it relates to the fund are enacted as a part of future releases of the Act. If it so pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. And as always, I thank colleagues who have made interventions on this bill that's before us. allow me to start by commending Senator Small Ferguson on his presentation, because because I found it very thoughtful and also very empathetic, which is an excellent combination. And just in welcoming you to the Senate, because I think this is the first time I've heard your presentation, even if you have presented before. So I wanted to commend you on it. And you know, I always make the point when I speak internationally about the matter of climate financing, that no matter how much resilience a country builds, Jamaica is a model, a global success story in terms of what a small, highly indebted country that has a history of every negative narrative that you can speak about underdevelopment, that has retold its story and taken the tough decisions to put us in a position to actually build a framework that allows us to be fiscally resilient and to be able to respond financially to an extent to a disaster. But it never prevents and cannot prevent, especially in a country within the Caribbean, which is the second most disaster-prone region in the world, it cannot prevent the dislocation, the disruption, the lived experience that a disaster causes. There is no way to prevent the impact on lives, in families, communities, individuals. And we are replete with stories of how how Melissa and Beryl, and indeed those of us who lived through Gilbert, and you know, really when a slice of bread was a blessing, because I mean there was the recovery period, what it took for us to recover, and the extent of the damage that was caused such deep destruction and dislocation. There's no way to explain it to countries who don't have hurricanes, that in a way that they will understand. And it's one of the reasons why we were so open to having development partners visit, despite the very tough toll that it took on our resources, to have them come to see for themselves, to tell the story. And indeed, it formed part of the cycle of generosity that has stimulated the type of international outpouring that Jamaica has benefited from. So I want to just make the point that in speaking about this bill, which narrowly addresses a fiscal management or financial management issue, and as you have said, is a matter of fact, it's a practical response to a factual circumstance. The funds exceed 10 billion, we need to remove that as a cap. But also the subjective position which has been taken, which is to, or the policy position which has been taken to require the annual $400 million payment into the fund until the $10 billion threshold is reached, and thereafter for it no longer to be mandatory, but not that it must cease. So the point is to allow flexibility. The reality is that the significant macroeconomic reforms that this administration has undertaken over the past 10 years, together with the expansion and deepening of our social welfare support, the addition of a new social pension, the increase in pensions, the increases to PATH, the investments in health, the investments in security, fundamental responsibilities of a government which were undertaken while not imposing new taxes on the backs of the Jamaican people. This has been very delicate balancing work. It has required tough choices, tough balances, and very strategic thinking. It has required the move away from sequestered funding, as Senator Morgan pointed out, and ensure that we move to central treasury management so that funds can be leveraged in the best and most effective and broadly flexible way as possible to deliver the widest and most impactful use of government resources. it is a move away from private fund management to the best management and most flexible management as required to deliver across a broad spectrum of needs of the Jamaican people. So in this context, while we understand the view that says keep putting into the fund, keep mandating that 400 million be paid in every year, we understand that perspective. For us, it is not the best perspective. It doesn't allow the level of flexibility which we have already demonstrated a capacity to do in a way that is effective for the Jamaican people. So I want us to recognize that we have again sought to achieve the best balance possible, and that is require the 400 million annually until a threshold of 10 billion is reached. And while that 10 billion is not a maximum, so that funds can be coming in from other sources and other resources, it won't require it as a transfer from the consolidated fund account. So it allows for some flexibility. But it doesn't, it won't stop it if the funds fall below 10. So a 10 is just is a minimum threshold. And it doesn't exclude other sources. On the matter of its treatment, it is reported on within the estimates of expenditure. So it is not managed as a separate like the NIF at this point. It is a new fund that is simply an accounting treatment, not a privately managed fund. Is this something that will be considered differently otherwise? That is something to be considered, but as it is now, it is an accounting treatment. So it's reported on and audited in the same way that the budget is generally treated. But that being said, Mr. President, I think the balance before us is clear. 3 clear changes. We are removing 10 billion as a cap. It is now merely a threshold, but one which we will keep to. The 400 million will be mandated annually until that threshold is reached, and the provision that had spoken to a 2023-2024 action has been found to not be relevant, is being deleted for good order. So in that context, Mr. President, I want to recommend that we recognize that our robust disaster risk financing framework has worked well for us as best as possible for a country in our particular circumstances. It allowed for an immediate flow of critical liquidity to supplement the government's own contingency resources. And we want to take the opportunity again to express appreciation to our international partners who have continued to support us on, in matters of technical capacity as well as with financial resources and in-kind resources. I want to also recognize that so far as I'm aware, while we have looked at one aspect of the Auditor General's report has been raised, that the funds that have come in to support Jamaica have all gone to where they're supposed to go, and this is something that we have to celebrate because the transparency that's been afforded by the Support Jamaica website is unprecedented. The ability to, there's still more to be done in terms of our processes, and this is why the ODPEM was moved into the OPM so that we could directly oversee the type of changes which have been needed for years, in fact, and are now being implemented. You could go on the website and see what districts were being distributed to. You could go and you could see what donations were, where distribution was going to take place, from which of the 8 hubs that had been set up by the JDF, so that you could tell, from people in the diaspora could call their family and say, listen, make sure to go by the JDF hub because they are going to be distributing tomorrow. It has really been a step change, and one we're not an administration to sit on laurels, so we continue to look at how we can improve more, and we continue to work to ensure that we improve our ability to respond actively to disasters and to deliver relief. So again, Mr. President, in this context, I thank colleagues for their contributions, and I ask for second reading of the bill.
Thank you very much, Minister. The question is that an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act be read a second time. Those in favor?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. I put clause 1. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I put clause 2. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Aye. Against? The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister?
Mr. President, I ask for third reading of the bill.
Members would have heard. Those in favor? Against? Mr. Clerk?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act read for a third time and passed.
Yes, Mr. President. Might I ask for recommittal of the item notices of motion given orally?
Members would have heard that question. Those in favor? Aye. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at the last sitting, holdover motion was... What? Oh. Okay. Yes, well. The agility, effectiveness, and our ability to respond to changing circumstances are things we try to keep at the forefront of our agenda. And so here we are. Here we are. Mr. President, a holdover motion was taken at the last sitting, but a decision was taken in that other place to not prorogue as intended, to take additional items of legislation to move things further forward, and it is therefore important that we respond accordingly to ensure that our agenda also remains appropriately aligned. So I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved with reference to the sessional select, joint select, and select committees, which were appointed in the current session of Parliament, and where these committees have not completed their deliberations, that in the new session of Parliament, this Honourable Senate be empowered to enable these committees to proceed with the issues referred to them from the stage reached before prorogation. Be it further resolved that the composition of all these committees remain unchanged, except where necessary, by further motion taken and approved by this Honourable Senate. And be it further resolved, with reference to the matters identified below, which are included in the order of business in this session of Parliament, but for which deliberation has not been completed, that in the new session of Parliament, the Senate be empowered to proceed with them from this stage reached before prorogation. 1, an act to amend the Jamaica Promotions Corporation Act and to provide for connected matters. 2, an act to amend the Jury Act. 3, an act to amend the Cybercrimes Act and to provide for connected matters. And 4, private members' motions, numbers 1 and 2. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which was... 1, 2, and 3. Oh, I presumed that you were either 1 or 2. My apologies. I did not check. You're 1, 2, and 3, so your motion is preserved. Mr. President?
Thank you very much. So we return to public business.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice, or rather I now move for the suspension of standing orders to allow me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Thank you very much, Minister. Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Against?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, having indicated, we not only had important Joint Select Committee meetings yesterday, which are composed and have had work comments, but we've also taken a new motion today and received 2 new bills from that other place, and that places us on good footing to ask that the holdover motion be approved by the Senate, in which context I ask for its approval.
Thank you very much. Members should have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? Minister?
Mr. President, that item having been taken, it is not anticipated that we would do any further. It's approved. Motion is approved, yes. Yes, it's not intended to do any further business today, Mr. President. Might the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed, because better safe.
Thank you very much. Members, the question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those all in favor? This Honorable Senate now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed.
$156,000 more Jamaicans are working. This is more than any other time in our history. Your government is caring for you.
I wonder who that somebody be. No, sir. Let me look for my glasses. Oh, that somebody look like rice up. It's Lottie walk on. Me glad for see you, Roy. Although things never go on for you, America, me glad to see you there.
Yes.
Lift your head high.
Yes.
Stay out of trouble.
Yes.
And you can have a fresh start back home.
All right, Mr. D. Thanks, you hear?
Let's all work together for a fresh start back home.
The following is brought to you by the Office of the Prime Minister.
Me, I go show them my way of justice.
I'm abused.
I need legal advice. I don't deserve this. The truth of the matter is, justice there for all of we. The Ministry of Justice has trained more than 5,600 persons in restorative justice practices. More than 200,000 victims have been supported by the victim services. Legal aid has reached thousands island-wide. Make we talk it out, not fight it out. Call 888 Justice today.
Dengue is ordinarily a mild disease. Persons may get a fever, headache, joint and muscle pains. The illness is often resolved through rest and adequate hydration along with paracetamol to treat the accompanying fever. However, on occasions the illness can progress to severe dengue, which can result in organ failure, bleeding and severe fluid depletion that can lead to shock and even death. Therefore, it is important for persons who are experiencing fever, vomiting, severe abdominal pain, bleeding under the skin, feeling very weak, or getting confused to seek immediate attention. Let us work together to protect ourselves against dengue.
When the storm rages and the world feels shaken, remember, our strength lies in unity. It's in coming together, sharing hope, and standing shoulder to shoulder that we find resilience. Every act of kindness, Every word of encouragement builds a brighter tomorrow. We are stronger as one. Our courage, compassion, and hope will light the way forward. Together we rise. Together we rebuild, because hope is never lost when we stand united, because we are stronger together.
Experience the natural mystic of Bob Marley at the annual Bob Marley Tribute Concert, Emancipation Park, Friday, February 6th, Bob Marley Day. See musical tributes by Stephen Marley, Ed Turner, Bushman, Warrior King, the NAJ Musical Trio, plus two reggae bands from Mexico.
There's a natural mystic flowing.
And PBCJ will be there to bring you the live broadcast starting at 7 p.m. That's the Bob Marley Tribute Concert, Friday, February 6th. A truly international natural mystic in music in Emancipation Park. Admission free!
Peace is a choice we make every day. When we come together with love and understanding, we create a future free of violence and fear. Let's stand united, build bridges, and nurture hope for our children and our communities.
Send me the something and come back. Back to sender. God, I thank you so much.
Miracles await and miracles abound. Tune in every Sunday at 7 a.m. for your share of the Miracle Revival Hour with Reverend Dr. Blair. Come for the word, stay for the worship, right here on PBCJ.
Miracle worker, work one for me.